Greetings.
Hi.
How are you? Daniel Silva here. How are you, doctor?
Oh, Mr. Silva, I'm fine. Gabe, they call me. Bill Gabrielli. Nice to meet you.
Gabrielli. Is that so? One more time on the pronunciation. Gabrielli?
Gabrielli, yes.
Gabrielli. Got it. Thanks for calling on early.
Oh, sure. That's a nice picture of the Golden Gate Bridge.
That is nice, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think that's Tammy Brimmer.
There she is.
I see Kim's trying to dial in here. Got a couple folks calling in early. Just wanted to give a little time for us, for me to get the pronunciation right, and to say thanks again. And so I'll be handing it off to you.
Sure. I do want to tell you that I will only be able to be in the meeting for about 30 minutes because they moved a critical chairs meeting to an earlier time because we're looking at issues related to physician payroll, actually, as everyone is. We're looking at how to keep paying people. And so I'll have to do that. But Lauren Lucht, who is the executive director for mental health in the health system, that she's my partner in the health system service line, she'll be joining and will help to continue to moderate. The two main speakers are Greg Nowalnik and Monica Carrillo. They're both psychologists in my department, the topics are really more psychology than psychiatry topics.
Sure.
But I'll talk about that a little bit.
Okay.
The group.
Well, we appreciate you getting on the line with us, and we'll try to start as close to 3 p.m. as possible, depending on how people dial in.
Are you hearing me okay?
Perfect. Yep,
Thank
absolutely.
you.
And then I'm going to go ahead and make you a co-host so that you have the ability to share a screen or mute folks. So you'll have control there. And Kim, I see you on the line.
Actually, what I could ask you to do, Dr. Nowalnik is the one with the slides. So he will need to be able to share the slides.
Okay, no problem. We'll just see how.
I mean, I have them, but I'm sure he'll want to control them.
Landon Center on Aging.
I need to, let me.
Hey, Daniel, it's Kim. Can you hear me?
Absolutely. Hi, Kim. How are you?
Hey, good. Are you having trouble finding the PowerPoint?
Yeah, I think we're just waiting for Dr. Nawalik to call in so we can
Yeah.
share the screen.
Okay, Greg, I think Greg's going to do a share screen. And,
Perfect.
Mhm.
We'll go ahead and make him a co-host so that he has
Perfect.
access.
Right. It looks like there's people waiting to enter.
Yeah, are you all comfortable with going ahead and letting people in?
That doesn't matter to me.
Okay.
Yes, it looks like they're there.
There's
There we
Greg.
go. Dr. Nawalik, welcome. I'm going to add you as a co-host so you can share the screen.
Sounds good. Thanks.
No problem. Thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it.
No, I just realized I didn't actually bring up the presentation yet, so that would be a good thing so I can share my screen and it'd be something worth seeing.
No problem. Hey, Kim.
Hey.
How many people do you think will join?
We had 42 RSVP. So
Wow.
we've been averaging between 40 and 50 participants depending on the webinar. I think we had about 68 the other day with Mayor Alvey. So these have been popular. And of course, it's such a timely topic. So I think we'll be in good shape. Hey, Caitlin.
Hello.
Guess I'm in charge of admitting people now, huh?
We all are. Any co-host can do it. So
Oh, okay, cool.
Monica's on.
Yep.
Greg, I can do it for you if you want to get the PowerPoint. I can let people in.
Oh, totally cool. I think I've got it. I'm sharing now. Should be.
We're seeing
yep,
it.
looks
Okay,
good.
I can see it. Looks good.
Good deal. Now, as far as advancing slides, I guess the remote control button is the one, or is it just the arrow?
You might, if you're on your keyboard, you might try the arrow button. Let's see how that works.
I
Yeah,
tried
I
the
think
arrow.
it should be the arrow.
Yeah, I didn't like that. Let's see.
Okay.
No, let me try this. No, that's not it either. Oh, there we go. Okay. Now we're good.
You got it.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yay. A few more minutes and then
There's still people coming into the waiting room.
Yep.
Cool.
Dr. Carrillo, are you able to hear us?
Yeah, I can.
There you go. I was hoping to test your mic. We've just done that. Thank you.
No, I'm not using a mic. I'm using my phone.
Oh,
The one on my computer doesn't work consistently, so.
And Kim, is that you under Dr. Gabrielli? The name isn't showing up because it's got the arrow, and when I click down, it isn't, but I'm guessing that's you.
Yeah, yes.
Okay, so that is
I
you.
can't tell exactly where my square is, but hi.
I know, and I've got this little strip of squares. I only get 4, and you're the bottom,
Yeah.
the bottom square.
Yeah.
Cool. You're hip with the AirPods going on.
it's a new world, isn't it? The Zoom world. It's amazing.
Right. What's that?
Daniel,
about
you
that.
were muted.
Yep. I do that at least once a week. I try to anyway. We have 3 p.m. on the dot. Let's give it about 3 minutes to let people trickle in. I see that we have about 27 currently on the call, so a few more folks will be coming in. So we'll start at 3:03.
Nice background, Daniel.
Thank you. That's the courtesy of our marketing director, Caitlin, who's on the call as well. So she really hooked us up.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Daniel, are you there?
Sure am.
Okay, I saw your picture drop off.
Yeah, I'm
You know
here.
what? I think somebody's microphone is not muted because I can hear someone. It sounds like they're doing dishes. You might want to mention that.
Yep.
I heard that too. I was like,
It is definitely not me doing dishes.
Hi, Lauren.
Hi. Wish
Okay.
I could claim that one. I'm sure my family does too.
We're gonna go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just saying we were still waiting a couple minutes for the last few people to join.
Yeah, it looks like we're about there. Kim or Caitlin or Kate, if you could be so kind, once we're getting started now. If you see people in the waiting room, just go ahead and let them in. We'll go ahead and
I'll do it.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and formally start the program now. Hello, everyone. Daniel Silva, President and CEO of the KCK Chamber. I want to welcome all of you for joining us today for this very timely topic. The Chamber's been working really hard to provide relevant information to all of our members. I say this on every webinar. If you haven't already visited our resource page, please do so on our website. Make sure to follow us on social media, on all the social media platforms. And if you have some great stories or you wanted some news that you'd like us to share, please let us know. We want to make sure that we're promoting all the great things that are happening and also educating and giving out the right information to our members so they can make the best decision for their businesses. Of course, we've seen a broad range of responses from our businesses across the board in terms of how they're reacting and dealing with this pandemic. I like to consider ourselves a small business as well. We're a team of 5, and we very quickly had to figure out how to work remotely and also tie in all the different factors that come into play when folks are working from home, the different stressors, really a different way of life. Three of our staff members are single moms, so there's kids in the home, and they're having to deal with me dinging them and pinging them every couple hours. Their schedules have completely changed, and so it has been an adaptation for us as well as other small businesses, I can imagine. So I'm really excited about the topic today. I think productivity is important, but just as important, if not more, is mental well-being. You can't have productivity if your folks aren't feeling good or they're not able to cope with the reality of the reality that we're living through now. So again, I want to send a special thank you to KU Medical Center and KU Health Systems for partnering with us on this program today. I'm really excited about the content. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Gabriele. And really quickly, if all of you can mute your mics, that would be very helpful. Dr. Gabriele, feel free to kick things off and introduce the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. And it's my pleasure and honor to be here and stand up in front of my team, our team, our great people here at the University of Kansas Medical Center and Health System. I've been the great honor to be the chair of psychiatry now for a little over 24 years. And I've seen a lot of great change during those years. We have a phenomenal group of people. We've been partners and members of the KCK community for a long time. Our department includes physicians with focus in psychiatry, child psychiatry, genetics, addiction psychiatry, and psychologists. And we have got a team of great psychologists too, and they have a dispersion of focus, foci, and interest as well. The topic that you have us present to you today has to do with something that's really foreign to most of us. We have not in our lifetimes lived through the kind of crisis, the medical crisis that we see here now. Unlike other crises, financial and war and other things that different people approach in medicine, this is here in our backyard. I want mainly to introduce and help moderate the discussion. I want to introduce the speakers, but first I want to introduce my partner, the person that I share leadership responsibility with here in the medical center in the health system, and that's Lauren Lucht. Lauren is the executive director for mental and behavioral health. She is the top person in the University of Kansas health system for our service line, which now involves 3 hospital locations and about 600 employees. And I have the privilege of being the chief on the university side for the psychiatry and behavioral sciences line. And that includes our educational activities, our research activities, and the providers that make all the difference in our health system line. So she will help moderate the discussion too. And then I bring along 2 phenomenal people. Dr. Monica Carrillo is the associate director of the psychology division in our department. She works closely with rehabilitation psychology and the trauma service and burn. And in her work, she has to deal with individuals who are at many times in stressful moments and circumstances. It helps people in the healthcare profession manage the stress and circumstances of their work. Dr. Greg Nawalnik is the clinical director of psychology at the Strawberry Hill campus down in the heart of KCK, at our inpatient adult psychiatry center. He has quite a background in forensic psychology and in other ways, but he is also a phenomenal spokesperson and knowledgeable individual who brings psychology to life. And he has a way of helping us through challenging moments. And he will talk about how people in our community can survive and live and thrive and see a better future after the current pandemic. So I think what I will do is now ask Dr. Nawalnik to go ahead and start to talk, and the others will come in later. I do want to say, before I turn things over, that as you all know, in the business community, you have to pay attention not only to the day-to-day operations, but you have to think about keeping people employed and the payroll and the personnel changes and so on. I will have to leave your meeting early because we have an urgent chair meeting today in which we're focusing on how we keep our doctors paid. And part of that process will be an important rethinking of things and adjusting to the current circumstances. So I beg your forgiveness for my leaving for that. But Lauren and Dr. Nawalnik, Dr. Carrillo will continue. Thank you. Dr. Nawalnik?
Thanks, Dr. Gabrielli. Thank you, everybody, for hosting us. We'll get this kind of rolling. I'd like to start off with, well, now my arrow isn't working again, so that's fun. There we go. All right, so first, we're going to just talk about, kind of outline the direct impacts that I think we're all too aware of, and so I really don't want to spend too much time on this, but, you know, to say that this, you know, this situation's touched every aspect of our life. You know, a lot of businesses have had to close, some permanently as a result. You know, there are going to be graduation ceremonies, things people look forward to, and also, you know, the most difficult is the people who are actually infected with the disease who can't have their loved ones or family members with them in the hospital, and then if, God forbid, they wind up passing, there's no funeral. And this also isn't just limited to people who, you know, have COVID, it's anybody. So, I mean, there was a patient of mine this morning that had a friend that committed suicide, and they're not going to be able to traditionally mourn that loss. And so there's a number of different impacts that are certainly going to be felt beyond, you know, the time whenever we're allowed to get back to life as usual. And so each of these impacts directly impacts the psychological functioning of every one of us. I think it's pretty safe to say that every day there's new information, new understanding, even new questions about how COVID is impacting what we do, what we know about it, how to prevent it, how to, a lot of stuff stayed the same, but it's the fact that in the 24-hour news cycle era that we find ourselves, there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of just grasping at little nuggets of information that become available by the hour. And so all this uncertainty produces increased levels of anxiety and depression. And then we wind up with, there's widespread misinformation, fear, paranoia, different rumor mills that are at work. And this can lead people to wind up actually avoiding mental health care. I'm happy to share that we have transitioned all of our outpatient clinic primarily to telehealth. So we have, we're using Zoom or Docs, I forget the other one, but anyway, we have the ability to serve our patients on an outpatient basis, but we're seeing decreased numbers of inpatient admissions, and one has to guess on some level that has to do with people that lump together the main hospital and our psychiatric operation. And so they fear that if they come here, COVID is here, when in reality, it's more likely at Target, Walmart, shopping amongst you. And so here you're actually safer than you would be, but the decrease in numbers, show that people might be misunderstanding what's going on in terms of how safe it is to come for an inpatient psychiatric admission. I think we see a lot of memes out there and a lot of social media posts kind of making light of how much alcohol people are consuming right now. There's the one that has like, a regular wine glass, and then there's the other that shows the woman opening a wine bottle and pouring the entire thing in this tall glass, and it all fits. And she's like, there, that's a quarantine glass of wine. And while these are funny for some, it underlies and kind of misrepresents the actual danger associated with trying to self-medicate anxiety and depression through alcohol use. I think we're seeing there are certainly increased rates of domestic violence as people are having to stay home. And that's really concerning because, as if this isn't unsettling enough, for some of those folks who are in domestic violence situations, their only escape used to be getting to go to work, kids getting to go to school. And now that little bit of solace has been stripped. And so, there's a lot of potential for trauma to be experienced. And so, again, just adding to the wide range of psychological impacts that this pandemic has had. So what we want to talk about here today, to get away from all the negatives there that I think we're all viscerally aware of, is talking about effective coping. What does that look like and why is it effective? And so here I have kind of just a quick list of everything we're going to be discussing. We'll get into these in depth, so I'll spare you reading them now. But one of the first things that we can do is to actually acknowledge our feelings, acknowledge the anxiety, acknowledge the depression, rather than trying to push it down and just soldier on through this. Carl Jung said, what we resist not only persists, but it'll grow in size. And it's a really wise statement in terms of the fact that trying to resist an unpleasant emotion produces an internal battle, which only complicates things. So rather than, just knowing that the wolf is at the door, having this fight with yourself to try to ignore it and say, no, everything's fine. The feelings that are aroused are quite real and impactful. And if we can move towards a stance of acceptance, it allows us to shift away from those disquieting and unsettling emotions, and we can find ourselves in a more peaceful and grounded space where we can have a shift from defensive passivity to more of an active engagement with whatever's going on. And so it's important to recognize that the repressed emotion is going to emerge in less pleasant and potentially more disruptive ways the more we try to mask it. And you can see that coming out, I think, in a lot of people right now with frictions with family members, friends, or coworkers, increased substance abuse, overeating, and then anger is a secondary emotion that's very often fueled by anxiety and depression that isn't being appropriately addressed. So we want to think of this as a shift from problem focused to solution focused. And the only way that can come to light is if we're actually willing to acknowledge that this is a real situation. So one of the next most effective coping skills, and this is kind of the gold standard, if you ever seek anybody for mental health care, you're probably going to have some discussion about deep breathing. And in the little image that I've chosen here, I'm not sure if you can see it wherever you have your tile of people, the woman has a hand on her chest and a hand on her belly. And that's the way that you can differentiate between good, effective diaphragmatic breathing and anxious upper chest breathing. And the difference in those is that diaphragmatic breathing is the kind of breathing, if you lie a newborn infant on its back, you see the stomach going up and down and the chest doesn't really move very much. We have to go through years of life and stress to be conditioned to learn how to breathe wrong, which is that upper respiratory, the upper chest going in and out, your abdomen not really moving, and you're not getting the same depth of oxygenation. And it actually will, it'll feed the anxiety more than fix it. So when you take a good deep breath, and what that looks like is taking a deep breath, holding it for a 4 or 5 count, then slowly exhaling, and then waiting until you need to breathe again. Don't force yourself to do it again right away. And then take another good deep breath, hold it for a 4 or 5 count, slowly exhale. And the way to make sure you're doing it right is, put one hand on your chest, one hand on your belly, take that deep breath in and let all your self-awareness go, and don't worry about your belly sticking out, especially if you've got this quarantine, little weight gain that's going on. Your stomach should be moving more than your chest. That's how you know you're doing the good, proper inhalations. And what this does and why it's so effective against a range of negative emotions is it can interrupt the anxiety and the angry response cycle. And we're going to get into that next, talking about the HPA axis, which is a lot of fun. But it's the biological process that underlies the fight or flight response, which is inherent to the anxious response. It allows prefrontal cortical activity, so the front of your brain, which is where we really become human, as opposed to the limbic system, which is in the middle, which is the mammalian brain. So if you think about when you come home, you have a dog, they get really excited and their body's moving all over. That's the limbic system. The dog isn't going to say, "Oh, you're home again." Okay. They're always going to be full on happy, full on mad, whatever it is. So the prefrontal cortex is the ability we have to inhibit our responses, and it allows us for rational response as opposed to emotion-driven responding. And so when we do this deep breathing, we typically think of the brain as being the driver of the body, and that's true by and large. But by taking these deep breaths, you can trigger mirror neurons in your brain that recognize how your body's functioning. And when you take these deep breaths, it sends messages to your brain that the alarm that was signaled was false or has resolved. Everything's okay. There's no need to be anxiously activated. And so your brain will actually downregulate again. It thinks that, and we'll talk about the HPA axis here. So what is the HPA axis, you might ask, or never thought of in your life? It's the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. So what that means is it's your brain speaking to your pituitary, talking to your adrenal glands, and pumping your body full of this fabulous chemical, or a cocktail of chemicals, norepinephrine, epinephrine, and cortisol. And it allows our body, back in the caveman days is when this was developed, and it was an incredibly preservative function, because if you're walking along and suddenly you hear a twig snap, you turn, quickly look at it, you want to focus on whatever made the sound. If it's a saber-toothed tiger, you want to be ready to either club it and beat the crap out of it, or run like hell and get up a tree somewhere or something to survive. Fight or flight, that's it. Unfortunately, without it, none of us would be here today. But because we had it, we're alive and well. The problem is the brain didn't get all the updates and doesn't realize that, a pandemic or an email from your boss or a 24-hour news cycle is not a saber-toothed tiger. It thinks that you're still in grave danger and have to respond physically. So we have this response, and the more often that this axis gets triggered, it gets habituated. And so it can be a hair trigger. Sometimes it'll keep running more and more. The 24-hour news cycle really does not help this at all. And so people keep looking at the 24-hour news thinking, okay, what is it? What's next? What's next? And every single story activates them again. And, when we get this dump of chemicals, it produces an elevated heart rate, your blood pressure increases, you breathe faster. If you had to run, you're well equipped because you've got good, excellent blood flow and oxygenation to all your muscles. Your fast twitch response is up and running. But when we just get this dump of chemicals and we're sitting in front of a television set or looking at a computer, the chemicals sit and you get that really uncomfortable sensation that we know as being nervous, being anxious, and stress. Over time, while these were great for hunting food and fleeing from a hungry predator, it has an effect of like an engine that's idling too high, too often. So it can lead to chronic high blood pressure. It can produce artery clogging deposits. It can produce obesity. It causes changes in the brain that can contribute to long-term anxiety, depression, and even addiction. And in times, it can even suppress the immune system. So if you think about it, in terms of this pandemic, this chronic starving, grabbing, news information around the clock, it's actually working against us in a number of ways. It's going to magnify that anxiety. It's going to magnify the depression, and it's going to, suppress the immune system. So everything that we don't want to have for a long-term pandemic situation, we're priming the pump the more that we keep grabbing in information. So I have said a number of times on the media and different outlets to say that the best you can do is limit your media intake to maybe an hour a day. I think the evening news does a nice job of encapsulating all those important nuggets that came out during the day and putting in a nice package that's very digestible, as opposed to, and then you've also prepped yourself to watch that, intake the information, digest it, and then move on, as opposed to grabbing and snatching at every single little fluctuation that occurs in the day. Deep breathing, it absolutely interrupts that HPA axis. It downregulates the central nervous system, and deep breathing never goes out. It will always work. It's not like the more you do it, it just stops working. It literally gets at the biological processes that underlie this anxious response. So the more often that you do the deep breathing and downregulate and calm yourself when anxious, the more you can reduce that habituation of the activation of the HPA axis. And it also facilitates the type of mindful space necessary that we'd like to see people use when they're doing a meditative practice, which is something else. And we'll talk more about that when we get to sleeping. And just so we're clear, the images here for the people meditating, you don't have to do the Zen yogi pose to meditate. You can literally just sit there and quiet your mind and breathe deeply. You can close your eyes or keep them open, whatever works for you. But I included these because the one shows the mother doing it with a child, and I think there's something very beneficial and powerful to doing that. If we can try to prime children to already be looking at deep breathing as a calming, resetting place, they'll be vastly better equipped than probably most of us ever were to get through life. Another great coping skill, exercise. And just so we're clear, all these images were from a search of exercise at home, which is what we have to do now. So exercise discharges tension from the body. It releases the endorphins, which are those feel-good chemicals in the brain. You get an immediate sense of accomplishment, which right now in the era of, struggling to connect and struggling to work, accomplishment isn't as readily available as it once was. So having the sense that you did something in the day is great for you. It can boost self-esteem. And then also it has a benefit at the back end of the day, which is if you've exercised and really kind of blown out a lot of the stress, you're going to be more fatigued and better able to get to sleeping, having a better, more effective night of sleep. And it can also, as we start to exercise and we start noticing that maybe we're tipping the scale in the right direction, it makes it more likely that you're going to want to start to eat healthier, which, there you go, what a segue. Healthy diet is another great thing that can really help us through this time. Stress can trigger another one of those leftover caveman mechanisms, which is one of the things that would provoke stress was about to become someone else's meal. The other thing that would provoke stress back in the cavemen was fear of not being able to eat for who knows how long because of availability of food. They couldn't just go down to the price chopper and grab something or hit Instacart and have them bring it to you. They had to actually come across the path of something you could kill and eat or pick something and eat. So when we get stressed, our brain that likes to play matching likes to think, uh-oh, this could be because we're not going to be eating for a while. So it makes you crave fatty, fried, sugary foods, things that are going to pack on, a bunch of weight and excess, longer burning stuff so that we'll be okay for a while without food. Unfortunately, it didn't get the memo that there's plenty of food around, most likely. And so when we wind up reaching for those crummy foods, there's a complex relationship with poor mental health and nutrition. But when you eat some really nasty food, it feels good in the moment, but afterwards there can be feelings of guilt or shame around, just really diving into a big greasy burger, eating a bunch of fries, mowing down. You go to have a couple chips, next thing you know, the bag's empty. So we just want to try to be mindful. Nobody's saying you can't have chips, you can't have burger, but let's do this in moderation. And let's try to lean more towards having the lean meats, fish, nuts, beans, fruit, vegetables, all the things that I think we all know are good for us, but for some reason, they're not as much fun. But allow yourself the credit to have kind of those indulgence meals once in a while. But the better that we can be eating, the better off we're going to feel. And there's been actually some studies that show that a good diet of the things listed there can actually cause a decrease in depression. Additionally, we got to stay hydrated. So drinking, the old thing is 8-ounce glasses of water a day. That's still in place. What 8-ounce glasses looks like is like a 2-liter bottle or half gallon, same thing. Restful sleep, very important. A lot of neurodegenerative processes that occur in the brain when we're sleeping. A good restful night's sleep fosters mental and emotional resilience. Anytime you have sleep disruptions, I think if everybody's had that rough night of sleep, you're just not as good the next day, right? It's not rocket science. But it can cause an increase in negative thinking, depression, and other negative emotions. If we're getting a good night's sleep, we really do bring about the potential for optimal level of mental and physical performance. And who wouldn't want to be at their best right now? Things that can help you with sleep. There's a whole concept known as sleep hygiene, which is where you only use your bed for sleep and sexual activity. So, all those folks that have been lying in bed watching Netflix, get out to the couch. Don't do that in bed because it confuses the brain. You want the bed to be somewhere that when you go, your mind knows what it's there for. Because like we talked about earlier, the brain likes to match things. And so the other thing is we want to try to refrain from screen time, if possible, at least an hour before we're going to bed. The screens are very activating, and that's even if you're playing Candy Crush or whatever kind of game. I don't know, that was like the most antiquated reference ever, but you're playing whatever game it might be. It's activating. Your mind is trying to work on this stuff. And if you're reading news, that it couldn't be worse. And Lord knows now, Instagram, Facebook, all these different social media things, people are shoving news out to there. So, put the phone down, put the tablet down. Don't check your email, anything an hour before bed. Try reading a book. Talk to somebody that's in your home. crazy concept there. And also try to avoid eating within the hour before bed. Something else, so we talked about meditation before kind of lightly. I like to tell a lot of my patients and encourage them to meditate for just 10 minutes. It's not a major disruption. You can do it in the morning while you're in your wake up moment, while you're lying in bed. Just sit up, do the deep breathing. And the way that meditation works is that you think of your thoughts as being on a conveyor belt. You're not necessarily, there's a reason it's called a meditation practice, which is that it can take years to get really good at quieting your mind. So initially, just think of your thoughts as being on a conveyor belt. They're going to come. They don't have any power. They're yours. They're in your head. Just let them come, acknowledge them, and let them go just as smoothly as they came. And just try to pay attention to the sound of your breath, the beating of your heart, and calm yourself and set a positive intention for your day in the moment, something you're going to strive for. Like, today I'd like to be more accepting. Today I'd like to be more open. Today I'd like to be more giving, whatever, something positive. And then at the end of the day, before going to bed at some point, do this again. Do the deep breathing. Set a timer for 10 minutes so you're not thinking about the time. Like, did I do enough? I do too much? That way it's out of your hands. Do the breathing, let the thoughts come and go. You can even kind of use this time to reflect, how did I do on my intention? Was I more open? Was I more giving? Was I more thoughtful? Whatever it is. And it really is centering. You're calming your body, you're calming your mind, and that's going to set you up for the potential for having good, restful sleep. Something else that does get in the way of restful sleep, alcohol. So sure, people who drink, you may wind up drinking to a point where you get real tired and you pass out. The fact is you're going to wind up having not as deep of a sleep, restless sleep, waking up a bunch of times in the night. If you can cut alcohol out, a good while before you go to bed, you're going to see a higher quality of sleep, and it's going to be a lot more beneficial for your mental health. Now, how do we handle our kids? I'm sure some of you out there have kids, and some of you are probably stuck with them at home all the time, now having to teach them too. And I know a lot of them have questions, and the little pictures I chose here, the one kid's really owning his, anxiety level. The other one is having a fit. And these are two ways that kids can look. They're not really great at being aware of what anxiety and uncertainty is. So a lot of the behavioral acting out that we're seeing is their way of communicating to the best of their ability that they're unsettled, that they're not comfortable, they're scared, they don't know what's going on, they don't really know why, and they don't know how to express it verbally. So what you want to do is try to create a safe space for them to be able and be comfortable to ask questions or share concerns that they have. Answer those questions honestly, even if the answer is, I don't really know. You can please use words and concepts that children can understand, and try to be mindful of their age and their language and developmental levels. Trying to explain this like you would to a colleague isn't really going to work with a young kid. And then also be prepared to repeat the information without getting irritated, because a lot of the times the reason they're coming asking the same questions over and over is they just want to make sure, and maybe they liked your response and it made them feel calmer, so they just want to hear it again. And most importantly here, handle your anxiety before trying to soothe theirs. It's kind of like the FAA with the oxygen. Put yours on before you're going to try to help somebody else. And then it can be really helpful just to put yourself in their shoes and think back, for some of us longer than others, to when you were a kid, and remember when you got scared of something, whether it was a thunderstorm or, something you saw on the news or whatever's going on, how much better it made you feel when you went to your parents and they were calm and they weren't alarmist and they weren't afraid and they told you it was going to be okay. Well, now we're parents. You're in that role. So it's up to you to be that calming presence for them. And the other thing is that depending on the age of the kids, a lot of them have access to information. They're going to hear things. And so that's where you want to be honest, and you want to be willing to go with them to find answers that you don't know, so that it becomes something you're doing together and you're getting information from good, proper factual authorities. As far as other tips, sorry, the "we're totally okay" still cracks me up. Give yourselves credit in this time. That's going to be one of the most important things, because I think that we look on social media and we see some of these moms who are just, or dads who are going above and beyond and being just amazing, which, let's keep in mind, there's a long continuum of existence. And, nobody is perfect, and there's no right way to go through something like this. You just got to do your best. And every single day is an opportunity to grow and to improve and to figure out a way to, make the most of this. It can be really helpful to find the positives in your situation. I know that as this goes on, it might be harder and harder to do that. But I bet that if you take the deep breaths, push back all the anxious thoughts, and look at what's under your roof, you'll find that there's something to be grateful for. And so that's the important thing. We want to emphasize the positives, not focusing on the negatives, though that's really the temptation right now. And then check in with yourself. Know that it's okay to not be okay. And there are a lot of different resources available. You have all these coping strategies. I'm going to, I emailed the PowerPoint slides to Kim so she can distribute this to any and everybody who wants this. And if you find that when you're using all these coping strategies, somehow it's not enough, it's not working, that's okay. There are folks that you just get to a farther level of this and a couple of bridges too far. You want to reach out. It's probably time to consider consulting a professional, making sure you're getting help. If you're having any thoughts of self-harm, you want to make sure that you're going with 911. Emergency services are still available. Inpatient psychiatry is still readily available. There are professionals ready to serve. And we know that the demand is there, and we want to make sure that people know that we're here to answer the call. We want to make sure that people are acknowledging the need for that, especially in this time. That's my deal. Obviously, thank you so much for having us, and we're thrilled to be part of this community. And together we're going to find a way through this. I mean, this will have an endpoint. Even if it keeps moving back as we go forward, eventually we're going to get together and move on. And at that point, I think there's going to be potential for even more need of behavioral health support. So with that, I turn it back. You guys have any questions? Dr. Carrillo, Lauren, and I think Dr. Gabrielli had to leave, but we are more than available, and I'll shut my mouth.
Well, Dr. Nawalnik, thank you so much for sharing all of these helpful tips and tricks. And it's I think, really helpful to see what the professionals are doing and how you as our experts are managing, so we can take tips from you to maintain our own self-care during this time. So thank you.
Sure. Anybody have any questions, concerns, complaints? Oh man, I ended early so that we could have time for interaction. But if I just nailed it, then hey, that's that.
It's sounding like you really just nailed it.
Either that or I've panicked everyone so much that they're done.
That or they're talking on mute. We're all still getting used to this new digital way that we are having to interact and connect with each other. I want to thank the KCK Chamber for reaching out to us and letting us continue to engage. We feel really blessed to be part of the Kansas City, Kansas community, both at our 3901 Rainbow campus and at our Strawberry Hill campus. And we are just excited to be on the same team as you guys, and really optimistic that as a community, we're going to really be able to get through this. I've been looking at our numbers, not following Dr. Nawalnik's advice and tracking things hourly in bed on my email. So I'm breaking every single rule. But what I can say is, by doing that, I have looked and scoured through the data, and Kansas City has rocked it. We have just really done a phenomenal job at flattening the curve. And I thank each of you for your contributions to that and getting the word out. And I'm really optimistic. We are not going to look like New York, and that doesn't mean we're out of the woods, and it doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but together we made a big difference, and I'm really proud to be a Kansas Cityan right now.
Ooh, I found questions, Lauren. They're on the chat. I didn't see them.
They're on the chat.
Yeah. You want to answer the first one, Greg? And
Yeah,
I'll
sure.
tackle the second one.
So as far as somebody writes here, any suggestions on how someone can best help someone with small children to give them a break when the quarantine is in place? Yes, I know this is going to sound really simple, but just getting, obviously the weather today, far from cooperative, but I think we're turning a corner now. Get outside with social distancing totally in place. But I mean, if you're at home, you know, if you have a yard, get out in the yard, get creative, give the kid a shovel and just let him dig a hole. I mean, like it's as simple as things like that. I mean, let them run in circles, anything to get outside, get some sunlight, fresh air. It really can go a long way. I have two small ones myself, 4 and 6, and just going outside and looking at worms after it rains is a great, you know, that'll take forever. I mean, they love it. They're completely distracted. They get immersed in whatever they're doing. And in that moment, there is no COVID. There is no coronavirus. Everything is just as it's ever been. Now, of course, my kids also know that if we're in the front yard and somebody comes walking down the sidewalk, they got to get up in the driveway. So, you know, there are certain provisions that you want to make sure that you're putting in place to keep, you know, exposure risks down. But outside is still open. And even if playgrounds and stuff are not, that's okay. Kids are really resilient. They're very creative. And I think that's something that's been really exciting about this is getting away from screens, getting away from toys, and getting into just, you know, do stuff and get creative the way that, you know, they did back in the old days.
I will add to that. So this is Monica. I have a 5.5-year-old nephew, and our family is very musical. Now for him, what's nice is when we get on family Zoom calls, then he's able to show us the next musical piece that he has mastered with the rest of us. But to be honest with you, when we were kids, even just taking out pots and pans and banging them, I know it's annoying, but if you can put up with that, that in and of itself can be an expression of musical creativity, shall we say. And making music, singing, those kind of things can be very beneficial for the kids too. And it also stimulates a different part of the brain than one that you may be normally using with the kids. So that would be a good thing to do as well. And Beth asks, how can you find the balance between productivity in terms of overworking or the opposite, not having enough structure? And I think that can be very challenging, especially when you're having to work from home and it feels like there's not a separation like there typically is of you going somewhere to the workplace and doing your work. Even if you bring it home, sometimes you can separate better in these normal times with bringing your work home. What I would recommend is, I know when I'm having to work from home, which is not the case right now because we're having to come in, I do inpatient work. So I do have to come in. But when I do spend time working at home, I make sure that I do what I recommend for our teenagers who have difficulties with particular courses in school. I recommend that you spend no longer than 45 minutes on one particular task. Make sure that you're giving yourself at least a 5 to 15 minute break where you're doing something completely different from that. And then if you're having to do more than one type of task, switch off and on between those tasks that are more enjoyable, if possible, and those that are perhaps less enjoyable. And in that way, what you're doing is presenting yourself with a bit of a structure. You're helping yourself move forward in having whatever amount of tasks that you need to have each day accomplished that you can sort of check off your to-do list, and you're allowing yourself a balance of doing pleasurable or at least a little bit more fun activities with those activities that maybe are a little bit more of a grind or perhaps not as fun to do, and maybe more menial kind of tasks. I hope that kind of answers your question. Then in that way, you're feeling like you're being productive, but not necessarily overly productive. There's a phrase that my mother always taught us when we were growing up, and that is work steady. Work steady. And in that, what you're doing is making sure that you've got your goals for the day, and you're meeting each of those goals while really trying to do things that both you find enjoyment from, as well as those things that perhaps you find a little bit less enjoyment from. And then I think you'll find yourself having just the right amount of productivity at home. And sometimes even changing it up and doing some things in different rooms in the home can be helpful as well. So you might even consider that.
Well, and something else I'm going to jump on that one too is that I think this work from home shift brings out a lot of personality differences in folks. And there are some people who will shirk working at home and take advantage of it and not do as much as what they probably would have done in the office. And other folks, and it sounds like, Beth, this might be you, look at it as there's almost a sense of guilt that, like, because it didn't take 8 hours to do what had to be done, you work 10 hours just to try to convince and look like you're actually like, I'm really busy, I'm really working. And I've noticed that in not having the structure to end the day. And so I think, Monica's suggestions are great. I also feel like there have to be boundaries, and you have to turn the email off, shut the laptop at, the time when you probably would for the workday. Try to keep a schedule is going to be the most important thing. Getting up in the morning, still showering, still getting dressed like you're going to work. It can go a long way in preventing the bleed over where depression can kind of start to creep in, because not having the routine, not having the structure can be very disruptive for some people. And I think there's a mindset, we're conditioned that on Monday we get up, we shower, we get dressed, we go to work. And sure, we're starting to blend into now, like, what's a weekend? Like, there's no point in it because there's no big game, there's no activities for the kid, like everything's done. So Monday looks a lot like Sunday. So anything that you can do to preserve a differentiation between your work time and then you time, it's great. You have to carve out time for yourself, because otherwise I think that we all know that these things become leashes and we don't carve out enough time for ourselves. And that was an issue before for a lot of folks, but it's magnified now. And so you want to make sure that you are shutting down, turning it off, and giving yourself time for you, your family. And it's difficult now because your family is now bleeding into your work. And so that's where Monica's piece of taking pieces, and maybe you allow yourself to work later into the day and don't work as much during the traditional day if you can avoid, if you don't do meetings. That way you're still carving out time to get done what has to get done, but you're preserving time for your family. You're going to keep your kids engaged. And I think this segs nicely into Caitlin's question, who asks if we have any tips for leaders or managers who are making them to help make employees' healthcare a priority during this time.
I do.
Yeah.
I do.
So there's a couple of things that I want to make sure to say, and then I'm sure both Greg and Lauren have some ideas as well. I think number one, the best thing you can do is try to be the best role model that you can be. You've always been a role model as a leader or manager, but what would be really important is if you're leading a meeting or taking part in a meeting, that you share with folks what it is that you're doing to help take care of yourself and your family. So what I would suggest is maybe either at the top of the meeting or at the end of the meeting, you might make sure that you carve out at least 5 minutes where people can talk about what it is that they're doing to help with maintaining a good sense of mental health around themselves, and for their family, so that they recognize that not only is it important for you and you're telling them how you're making sure to make your mental health a priority, but then you're also hearing from others and they're hearing from others what mental health, what making mental health a priority means and what that looks like.
Excellent advice, Monica. Some of the things that I would suggest from a leadership perspective that we are trying to do to support our employees during this really stressful time is all of us are taking the personal ownership and checking in with at least 2 people per day that are working remotely, because we know that adds an element of isolation. As much as those of us with kids complain about the volume of forts being built in our house and blankets being everywhere and all of the fun messes kids love to make, being completely alone, there are a lot of people that live alone. And so then when you take the travel to work and the interaction with your colleagues out, you leave a hole. And so I encourage everyone to, whether they're a colleague or just a friend or family member, identify a few people per day that you're going to just check in with and see how they're doing. And also I think we all need to get back into a routine of finding something besides COVID to talk about. We're going to still be talking about COVID every day for a long time, but it's important to also think about some non-COVID conversations to have, because we'll all burn out so quickly if all we do is have COVID related conversations. So we've been trying to identify things that are easy conversation starters that have nothing to do with this, but this is an opportunity where we can actually get to know and support one another better, and choosing to do that about things that aren't 100% COVID related is really helpful. I had one more idea that I wanted to share about keeping our kiddos busy. Kids are amazing little humans that haven't been tainted by the world yet. And so they like to fix and give. And so regardless of our situation, if you give your kiddos a few minutes in the pantry to pick out 1 item or 3 items that they will let you take to the food bank on their behalf. I mean, food banks are empty, blood banks are empty. There's so much help to be done. And when we can engage our kiddos in that, they feel part of the solution, and that helps keep us from feeling like victims. And that's just such a great opportunity to learn as a child. And so whether it's we're spring cleaning, so will you help me clean out the Tupperware cabinet, and we'll put it in the box and we'll take it to Goodwill when we can, or if it is finding some items to take to the food pantry for those that are really struggling, because there are significant problems right now with food supply for people. Anything you can do to engage your kids in a way to help, it gives us all a sense of control to feel like we're contributing or helping. And so let's not own that all ourselves as the adults in the household. Let's engage our kids, and they'll turn out to be better humans for it later, and we'll feel better because it will warm our hearts at the end of the day as well.
I just want to also point out real quick, Beth, you're doing a fantastic thing in keeping your mental health, and that is crocheting, or I'm not sure exactly what you're doing, but embroidery looks like.
I'm knitting a scarf.
Sorry, I couldn't think of
I
the word
love
knitting.
it.
Awesome. I wasn't sure if you were braiding someone's hair or what was going on there.
No, I thought that is perfect actually, because you're multitasking, but at the same time you're doing something enjoyable. So that's a really good example also of being able to multitask and doing something enjoyable at the same time. And I'm glad that you're sharing that with us. I always think that's, by the way, I'm jealous that you can do that. I can cross I cannot do that. And the other thing that I want to add is, in terms of different conversations other than COVID, I totally agree with Lauren one of the things that we're doing with our healthcare workers here is offering a different question every day for them to think about that has absolutely nothing to do with COVID. But you could also do things like what my husband is doing, who has to stay home during this time to work, and that is finding ways to engage our 19-year-old female long-haired cat, who is a calico, and now apparently has the ability to type her name on the computer. Pretty amazing. Yes, she even can read the computer, at least it looks like that. He's figured out a way to have her actually follow the cursor on the page, so it looks like she's actually reading the computer screen with great interest, and he shares that with the rest of our family. So
I love that. I think we might need to see a YouTube video of that at some point.
Very cute.
Yeah.
I
so
love
those
it.
kind of things you can do actually with your family is meet new different things to do. I would not recommend putting costumes on animals if they're not in agreement. However, you know, you could do kind of fun and different things like that as well. You'd be amazed at what animals can do even when they're 19 years old. Sorry, Greg, you were going to say something.
I don't know that I was. No.
Oh, I thought you did.
I guess, we're running, I think, close on time. Did anybody have any other questions? The one other thing that I did want to throw out there is that, like a lot of the anxiety in this situation comes from like feeling out of control. Like we don't have anything that we can control. And from the very beginning, whether early, mid-March, one message has stayed the same, and that's social distancing, washing hands, not touching face, though I think I touched mine 5 times during this presentation. But just, the more that we can do and exert control over our limited sphere, if everybody's doing that, because we're really only as strong as our weakest link. And so the message I try to share is don't be the weak link. And if you're not doing that, then you're doing the absolute most that you can. And then you have nothing to worry about in terms of spread. And we'll get past this and get back to, business and life and love as usual. So.
And wear a mask, please. At least while you're out. You don't necessarily need to do it at home, obviously.
Unless
looks
it's
like-
just so adorable, it fits with your outfit.
It does, thank you. This is today's mask.
Love
Looks
it.
like we're right at 4 o'clock at time, so I want to be considerate of everyone's time. Thanks again for all of you for joining us today. Really appreciate the content. A lot of great tips that I know we'll be using ourselves at the KCK Chamber, KU Medical Center, University of Kansas Health Systems. Can't say enough about what you all mean to this community and the very significant role that you're playing every day, especially during this time, to keep us safe and well informed. So thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. We did record the webinar, so we will be posting this online and sharing it abroad to the folks that cannot make it today. Hope everyone has a great weekend. Stay safe and take care. Goodbye.
Thanks
Thanks,
you.
everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Stay well.
Yep. Bye-bye.